Hi there. Today we'll be discussing bias in machine translations with a focus on gender bias. In the context of computer systems, bias refers to the systematic and unfair discrimination against certain individuals or groups of individuals in favor of others. For example, here we see a translation from Dutch into English. The Dutch text should actually be translated as "the farmer is doing her job" instead of "the farmer's wife is doing her job." Dutch has two forms, boer, which is a male farmer, and boerin, which is a female farmer. English only has one neutral form, farmer, so the gender of the farmer has to be made explicit or signaled by a pronoun, in this case, her job. However, MT engines often mistranslate such gendered forms, in this case by changing a woman farmer into a farmer's wife. Similar problems arise when translating from neutral into gendered language. For example, the English nurse always translates into the Dutch verpleegster, a feminine form, even when it is specified that the nurse is a man. In this next example, from Dutch into Portuguese, both people involved have been misgendered. The Dutch sentence says, "The conductor spoke to the dancer," where de dirigente is a feminine form and de danser is a masculine form. However, in the Portuguese translation, the conductor is now a masculine form and the dancer a feminine form. So why is this the case? First of all, machine translations are only as good as the data on which they are trained. Any gender disparity present in the training data will be reflected back in machine translations. For example, there is often unnecessary reference to the fact that someone is a woman, such as woman doctor or woman scientist, compared to the terms doctor or scientist. The latter two are often considered masculine by default in machine translations. Secondly, there may be a technical bias within the creation, designing, and testing of machine translation systems. As MT systems are often based on statistical principles, those trained on data with a high frequency of masculine terms will more frequently replace feminine references with masculine ones. Gender-neutral or gender-ambiguous language also tends to default to masculine forms. Finally, there can be an emergent bias in MT systems. This occurs when they are designed for different contexts and different audiences than they are used for in reality. For example, historical data on which tools are trained may reflect past stereotypes and lack of diversity and may not be appropriate today. MT systems that are not built to cater for a diverse user base will not create individualized translations for non-dominant groups, and so default to the standard, in this case masculine, form. So why is this a problem? Bias in machine translation contributes to and reinforces wider societal bias. In the case of gender bias, this results in continued underrepresentation and stereotyping of women and non-binary individuals and can lead to misgendering, potential miscommunication, and discrimination. It is also important to realize that bias in machine translation is not just restricted to gender, but also applies to race, religion, ethnicity, sexual orientation, among others. While bias in machine-translated texts is largely introduced within the translation software itself, there are several ways an individual can help reduce the gender bias in their translations. Firstly, make sure you understand how gender is handled in both your source and target languages, and within your text. While gender bias occurs more frequently in gendered languages, such as Spanish or Portuguese, translations in non-gendered languages are not free from gender bias. Secondly, pre-edit your text to provide sufficient context and to be more concise and clear. Account for how your source and target languages incorporate gender and, if appropriate, remove and alter instances where gender is ambiguous to reduce the chance of MT services introducing errors. Finally, post-edit your translations to correct for any errors, including potential instances of gender bias. Often, MT engines offer different translation options of a word or phrase that also include differently gendered forms. You can also try multiple different machine translation services, such as Bing, DeepL, or Systran, and compare the translation outputs. For example, in this case, DeepL correctly determined that de danser must be masculine, while Google Translate did not. However, both engines still incorrectly translated de dirigente. Overall, understanding and accounting for the inherent bias within MT services goes a long way in reducing their impact. If you would like to learn more about machine translation literacy, please visit our website. For more detailed discussion about gender bias in machine translation, please see Savoldi et al. 2021, to which much of this video refers.